yeah, we are now where we are right now. We have a 9,000 bird operation just outside of Warwick in Queensland. But the main reason I believe we're here is because this is actually our second go at it. We had a notifiable illness less than 2 years ago. And yeah, we've had a complete shutdown and rebuild and a pretty long and drawn out experience with that. So we have plenty to share on emergency animal disease. So.
So I might follow that up. That seems like an invitation for some questions, I think, Matt.
Yeah.
So I suppose my first question is really around, that the disease that you did have 2 years ago.
Yep.
In terms of that, if I were to ask you now what you wish you knew 2 years ago, what do you think the top three things would be that you wish you had have known back then, and how that may have changed, things that it may not have changed, but in terms of what you wish you had have known before that happened?
I think the one clear leader is our biosecurity. We operated like a small family farm. We operated with a house in the middle of the property. We had a common driveway. We had good safe food practices and good biosecure practices in our paddocks, but there was a lot of crossover that we weren't thinking about with car tires and so many little things that we weren't across. And that has sort of been the basis for all of our sleepless nights. Getting Salmonella enteritidis, it's invisible. The chickens were perfectly healthy. You couldn't see it. So the sleepless nights were then built around what can we do to make this not happen a second time, and that's what we've based our entire biosecurity around.
Yeah, I think the biggest part is we never, and still to this day, don't have a actual answer on how it come to us because it had been in New South Wales for 2018-19, and then it went really quiet for a few years, and all of a sudden it was in Queensland on our farm and nowhere else in the region. So what we've sort of tried to do is everything that's been thrown at us through safe food, biosecurity, anyone that wants to say how we might have got it, we've worked out how to mitigate those risks on this new farm. So because we bought a vacant block of land and we were able to rebuild again from experience instead of from not knowing what we were doing, we've sort of every possible way that we've been told we could have got it, we've mitigated. So
as best as
we can anyway. There's things you can't mitigate like wild birds, and especially in a pastured setting, but
I'm still trying that. We have a laser.
we've actually invested in a laser that protects the paddocks from wild birds actually landing on the pastures. So
yeah. And just for the benefit of some of the people in the room, they may or may not be aware of why you had to move your operations. So do you want to give a little bit more detail about SE and why you had to move?
So we had Salmonella enteritidis detected through a couple of sick people in January 23. We went through all the protocols, followed all the systems. We had biosecurity and safe food at the dinner table almost weekly, trying to help us work through it all. In the end, obviously, it was a total destruction and decontamination. There was no way that we could confidently keep anything and confirm that it would not have border disease with us all over again if we were going to start again. So we destructed obviously all of our animals, 11 dogs, all of our sheep and goats, 7,000 odd chickens. And we destroyed all of our infrastructure. So we went through the process of cleaning it, but then we just scrapped it. We needed to clean it before we could scrap it. I think that was probably one of the wildest days watching them.
That was probably the hardest bit for me. I mean, the animals was horrendous, but because I'd built everything by hand from scratch, I had to watch it all be destroyed. And, it was almost $500,000 of infrastructure. And I think we got about $4,000 in scrap value for it. So, and the salmonella can live in your soil for up to 2 years. It can also live in the rodents, foxes, anything that is live and moving around the farm can potentially carry it. So we were first generation, and we, don't get me wrong, we absolutely loved the house and the block of land and everything we had there. But we also knew that the business we had was a good business, and we wanted to find a way to continue that.
And we also had a phone call from a caged farmer in Victoria that was 4 or 5 years down the track and still not able to wipe his farm of the disease. And we got off that phone call and thought, what's the difference between him and us? We believe that there is a way to work out of any problem, and that was kind of where we said the only difference is that he can't up and move, we can. So that was where that choice was made, and then the farm was cleaned and decontaminated.
There is a few reasons. I don't want it to sound like a plug, but you can see the hat I'm wearing. We're in a program called Farm Owners Academy, which is all based around, growing as farmers and not just looking at a business as I go out and jump in a tractor every day and like they're teaching you to be the CEO of a business. And then Hayley, our numbers, like we've got them right down to the fact that we know our cost of production per egg, like it's that. Like Hayley has a skill set that not many people have, which is she's got a finance and economics degree. So we knew the profitability of the business and just how well it can perform if it's running at its peak. And the biggest one was, in my opinion, is it just wasn't the end of our story. Like that wasn't, we didn't want to be forced out of what we were doing. Like we chose to get in for a reason, and we were pretty passionate about it then, and we still are now. And we want to help other producers to be able to do it safely and, as securely as possible, because the people want to see pasture-raised eggs. I know a lot of the industry really don't want to see pasture-raised eggs because it's such a higher risk business, but we need to find a way to produce pasture-raised eggs in a biosecure manner that's safe for everyone. So we wanted to be we wanted to be the leaders and show that you can do it and you can rebuild from a disaster like this. So.
Could you guys share a little bit more about some of those things that you have put in place that you kind of wished you had known about or thought about before that might be useful for other producers?
We looked at things like car tires. No one is allowed to enter our farm. We have a grey zone. Even our feed truck is delivered in our grey zone. There is a fence where we collect from the opposite side, which is, we call it the secure farm. Staff come in and change their boots and wash in before they then put on work clothes. They have civilian and work clothes. We made our bank manager, when we re-established, a lot of our infrastructure is obviously financed, and we made him look from the neighbour's place with binoculars because we just couldn't confirm that he hadn't been somewhere that we didn't trust. We have had one person enter in 12 months now that isn't a staff member or Matt or I. We have a very strict guideline that hangs on the fence that says, if you've been here in 7 days, if you've done this, if it breaks it all down and into how long before they're allowed to enter. We've had our stomachs all tested, and if the staff are aware that if they have any sort of gastro symptoms, vomiting, diarrhea, even stomach cramps for men, that they need to go and have that tested.
And they can't work for the 5 days until the results are in. So but I think the biggest thing we did is we got comfortable asking big questions. So we spent a fair bit of time on the phone to McLean Farms,
which is a subsidiary of Sydney Queen.
Like they're operating farms with over 500,000 birds very biosecurely, and we just asked them questions and said, what do you do? How do you do this? And I think because they could see that we had the protection of the entire industry in our minds, they were quite happy to share information and help us to establish a very biosecure farm on a smaller scale. And we're now actually in contact with them on sourcing our birds direct through them, because we know they've got all the vaccinations we know that we need specific to our region. Like there's cholera vaccinations that are a certain type for the Darling Downs, which is So we're trying to build a relationship with them so that we don't have to get our birds from a source that's not biosecure. So, because that's one of the bigger ones that biosecurity did flag is the bird rearers.
Because in Queensland we don't have the order for SE, so there's no confirmation that those birds are coming.
So on
clear
the
of it.
old farm, our bird rearer was actually bringing them to site and driving his vehicle into the paddock to unload the birds. And yeah, he was actually traveling into New South Wales to deliver birds as well, which, you know, we knew SE was still active down there. We don't have any proof on that or anything, but you know, that's just another risk that we've mitigated. So our birds arrive into the grey area, we unload them from inside our farm, and we do all the work ourselves. We don't have them enter the farm at all. So
And the grey area is lined as frequently as we remember, but at least fortnightly, monthly.
yeah, just to make it a really high.
It's a very much a desert.
Nothing can survive in there bacteria wise. So yeah, that's kind of the mitigation side. Just everything that was thrown at us as a possibility, we've changed now. So
We've also trialed a laser in the paddocks, which we mentioned. It was recommended to us that it would not do our type of farming. It would only do the perimeters of our range areas because otherwise it's going to pick up chooks. We said bugger it, we'll test anyway, and we've put it all through the range area.
And it actually, the chooks don't really seem bothered by it, but it's actively working on crows and things that are trying to land all the time. So
we don't.
The other big thing we've done, which we haven't really gone into, is we've put our feed and water inside the trailers. So our trailers are built big enough that I've got a chain feeder system like you'd see in a free range shed, and water with all our dripper lines in underneath the lay boxes so that they're clean from the bulk manure and everything.
At first we were worried that it might make the birds not free range as much because everything's already there, like the premises with cage and barn that they never get to go out because they don't need to, but we found that they still wander.
As they've always done. They just know where the feed and water is, and it actually works very. I think it works a lot better because the birds get used to the sound of the chain feeder, and even your smaller birds that are usually low in the pecking order are getting a chance to feed because it runs around 13 times a day. So it's
no birds have access to it.
We don't usually we're not seeing that. You know, the big birds that are healthy of hogging the feeders anymore. So yeah, it's actually improved our system quite a bit. So
I wish I'd known that wall was coming, and had thought through how we might handle it should it come. But we hadn't really considered that there would be something that would cause us to lose everything.
Yeah, one thing we wrote here with one of the questions in the email was a piece of advice based on the experience. It was have an emergency plan in place. Don't wait for it to happen, because if it's already happening, it's too late and you can't think straight and you can't function properly. Like, have a plan for what you would do if AI come to your farm, for example, or SE, and have a think about, we can get control orders to have to lock birds in as pasture raised producers now. Like, do you have the ability to do that? Like, we've built these trailers with wings on them that meet the doors where we can actually actively lock the birds in for short periods of time because we have the chain feeders and waters inside if that was to come to us. So
we might have to do a small cull just to make
it a bit more comfortable.
But yeah,
if it's for no longer than 2 weeks, we've actually tested it on bird arrivals for 2 weeks of locking them in before we let them out on the pasture, and they've all fed and brought the egg uptake on and just as good as they would with free range. So yeah, it's just something to think about before it happens, not when you're in the midst of it.
And from a financial standpoint, what sort of impact it's going to have? Do you have buffers? Do you have a way to mitigate 3 months of no income while you just deconstruct your farm? Do you have a plan around that? Yeah, we find the same. We'd probably speak to maybe 2, maybe 3 farmers a week that say that it's government, and not one part of our business now has been forced on us. It's our choice to do all of these things, and to us there isn't even a choice. It's the required steps. We're working with Rachel on putting something together so that new farms coming on and existing ones, if they'll listen, will have a bit more of an understanding.
Almost like a competency-based system where they can actually go through a few steps and look at if they don't, or if they choose not to do this step, how it can impact their farm. And, you know, like just, I think it'll help because when we restarted, we realized that apart from applying for an RBE, there's really no resources that you given to you. You can go and find them if you want, but nothing is really given to you to say this is best practice.
Yeah.
And I think best practice is all you can offer people. Like you can't make them do it, but I think if you make them aware of it and show them the risks of not doing it, then it might make a difference. And
Well, on that note, I will say thank you to all of our panelists. I really appreciate your time. And I think, Matt, you're completely on it. I think sometimes the story needs to come from someone that people can identify with, and whether we like it or not, the government isn't necessarily that person on a regular basis. So I think you guys sharing your story from a producer to a producer is really important. So thank you very much for that.